Hello, everybody, and welcome to this 20-minute interview, a series coming forth in September on the environment and the church, the life of faith and the climate crisis. I have been looking so forward to the first interview with someone very special that I wanted you to meet. Now, this is someone you actually may have met at Elliott Church because he and his family have worshiped with us off and on for the last year. Of course, not recently since we're online. Nevertheless, this is a gentleman who is not only extremely knowledgeable about environmental issues, but also about the Bible and indeed about our spiritual relationship to this crisis. And I'm speaking of Professor Yonder Gillihan, whom I'm going to bring onto the screen right now. There he is, Yonder. You could say hello, and I'll continue with letting folks know a little more about you. But first, just to say that what we're about here is simply an informal conversation that we might have had at a coffee hour after worship at Elliott, together sitting in the corner with a few people, or possibly even better, a fireside chat at a cozy Irish pub. Be that as it may, here we are on the internet. Yonder is the associate professor of theology who focuses on Second Temple Judaism, which is the temple which Jesus knew, and Christian origins. And his research areas are extremely wide and deep, Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient moral philosophy. But most interesting, I see here, he has a strong interest in engaging ways that people have used and use the Bible to define the experiences of their own lives. So Yonder is a man after my own heart. He takes an existential approach to the very subject that he teaches. And the subjects, the courses range, of course, from Dead Sea Scrolls to the Gospel of Matthew, early Christianity in its Jewish context. Now, but really interesting for us, I think, is the undergraduate electives in a series at BC called Diversity, Justice, and the Common Good, a seminar. His is Race, Freedom, and the Bible in America. Race, Freedom, and the Bible in America. We need multiple interviews to go into all these. Also, of course, on 10 Commandments, and so on. Yonder also wanders farther afield than the college in that he lectures and leads workshops in various denominational circles. His family is, he's married and has two daughters, ages 16 and 18, and an older son who is 20. And they live in Newton since 2018. Yonder has taught at BC since way back in 2005. He was born and raised in the West Coast, Northern California, and then moved with his family then to Eastern Kentucky and Indiana. Again, a man after my own heart, being a Midwesterner myself. Yonder was educated at Ball State University and also at the University of Chicago, my graduate alma mater, and then completed his dissertation at Yale. Yonder grew up in a Christian family, which is not an incidental fact about him, both parents having been ordained in the Assemblies of God, a Pentecostal denomination. Well, with all that, we need to really get started on this conversation because I know you'll be very interested in the general theme that we're ranging around is coping spiritually with the climate crisis. And just to start right off, I'd like to ask Yonder about his current work that is clearly exciting him and animating him. I know earlier projects included things like Prospects for a Human Future and something provocatively entitled Instructions for the End of the World. Do you want to say what those instructions were and what you mean by the end of the world? And you should unmute.
Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you for this generous introduction. It's really wonderful to see you. And I wish that I could see people who are viewing this. It's been so nice recently to have a different population of faces on my Zoom screen. So great to see you.
It's great, likewise.
So I've been working recently, and by recently I mean over the past, say, 5 years, on developing resources by which students can understand how the Bible is relevant to 21st century life. And I had a really practical reason to do that. As a teacher in the Boston College Core, teaching Bible courses to a variety of students, many of whom have no background whatsoever in religion, I really needed to find a way to justify, why the Bible ought to be taught at all. And to be honest, I was very skeptical about its relevance to 21st century life. But as I earnestly sought to understand the relevance of the Bible in our current context, I took time to understand how the Bible has been relevant and meaningful to people in a variety of contexts. And I really came to appreciate how positively the Bible has lived with people in so many different contexts for millennia. It's only recently, I think, that it's been sort of reviled as a poisonous text that pollutes and terrorizes. And it's true that the Bible does have many uses which pollute and terrorize our society. But as I encountered the way that my own students regarded the Bible, the love for the Bible that many of them had, the respect for the Bible that a lot of students brought from a different tradition, I have to be honest, I became curious about its power and why so many people regarded it so seriously. Anyway, over the course of time, I came to recognize that some of the very powerful ways in which the Bible articulates the concerns of our own time. And one of the ways that's most gratifying to see and horrifying to realize is the ways in which the Bible's many different authors write at a time in which they perceive the end of their own civilization. So the end of the world seemed to confront the prophets of the 8th century as they confronted the might of the Assyrians bearing down on all the nations around. The end of the world seemed to confront the prophets of the 6th century, and the late 7th century, as the Babylonian Empire conquered the Assyrian Empire and the whole world seemed to be coming apart. Those who went into exile in Babylon faced the end of the world without any question. This is what Ezekiel and Jeremiah and others authentically encountered and countenanced. So I also see very explicit descriptions of the end of the world in some of the texts like Daniel and Revelation, and these have played quite heavily in the imaginations of Christians and others for millennia too. But the thing that I found so interesting about and kind of provocative about the ways in which the end of the world was brought up in these various prophetic texts is that, first of all, there's a lot of correspondences between the collapse of civilization in their time and what seems to be happening in ours. Like Hosea describes the birds of the air and the fish of the sea and the animals on the land dying. The land itself mourns. Death to wildlife everywhere, is what the ancient prophets see as part of their own phenomena. And we can see that correlating to reports from all over the globe in our own time. We can list phenomena like this on and on and on, and kind of appreciate with awe and with fear how dramatically consonant the experience of those who face the end of the world in antiquity is with the experience of us as we face our crises in the 21st century. So I saw that as an interesting way to those consonances were an interesting way to say, is there anything that we can do with these texts to inform our own encounter and our own engagement with the terrors of our age? Is there anything that these, besides looking similar, what can they do? And I discovered something really marvelous about them. More than anything that they say is the fact that they belong to a community that survived. They articulate the fears and the hopes of a community in crisis that doesn't know if it's going to survive. But we know that they did. And the fact that they survived is a fact that can encourage us, I think, more than anything that they say in our own time. And we can kind of look at the prophets now, and this is the stuff that I really enjoy doing with students, looking at them and asking, how did they get through the terrors of their age? What did they do to survive? And what did they rely on, to make it to the other side? Did they expect to make it? Were they surprised?
Reading those prophets, are you saying that that wouldn't be a resource for us who face this very dire moment? I think often about your students, the millennials to whom we've handed over this earth. But before you answer that question, I wanted to go back to what you said before about the Bible often being taken in a very toxic way. And in point of fact, I would ask you whether you agree with, say, someone like Lynn White back in 1965, who did the original study that set us off in this direction, which was that the content of the Bible, particularly the creation story about the dominance of human beings over the natural world, whether that didn't contribute to the exploitation of nature that was set in motion by human civilization, but probably more particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. Because one of the refrains I remember most from a friend, a secular friend, who said, "Well, I know the Bible means well." That sort of that little proviso tells you a lot that along those lines. So what is your response to that scholarly take?
White's perspective is a wonderful and an insightful analysis of how the Bible has been used. And, it's a cautionary tale. There's another more recent study published in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists on the interpretation of the Bible among evangelicals that argues that evangelical hermeneutics and this kind of dominion theology is one of the primary obstacles to a coherent collective response to the crisis of climate change in America. So that article is the foundation for one of the exercises that I have the students engage in, which is a thing that I call hermeneutical reenactments, wherein they take the Bible seriously in ways that it has been taken seriously historically. So one team of students is required to take the position of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists article and argue that the Bible is an obstacle to progressing in confronting climate change. And they argue the points with great detail and with reference to all of those arguments. But I also have the students prepared to argue from Gaudio at Space. Is that the one on the environment?
Oh, right. Pope Francis's, no, that's, I've got it right here somewhere.
You can see I'm not a...
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't have it right here.
Okay, anyway.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing. But anyway, there's an encyclical, an encyclical that I assign for them to read on the other side to show some of the legacy, both ancient and ongoing, of the Bible's use, its potency in formulating a response to the crisis. So the arguments that you're bringing up are really, really important to consider if we only look at the Bible as something good or something well intended, I think that we miss its value. It'll just be kind of something there that we can keep on the shelf. It ought to
Well,
be taken off the shelf because it does have some really important principles to convey.
are these principles located in a lodestone in some book or other, or is this a vein that goes through the Bible? How do you see that? Where does one look?
Right. Good place to start is the first 2 chapters, I'd say. I'm going to recommend that. And I think that those are a great place to start for the principles by which I would like people to understand the Bible, and also for some great examples of how those principles work. These are great principles also that, for creation theology and for environmental or engagement with the environment. So the first 2 chapters of the Bible, I contend, show us very clearly what we need to think about together. But they don't tell us what we have to think. In fact, they refuse to tell us what we have to think. And they do this precisely by giving us 2 stories that disagree with each other. So how important are stories of origin? They're super important. They're so important that there are 2. That's how important they are. You don't, one is not enough. You need 2 stories of origins. And it isn't important that their details agree. So the Bible refuses, in this case, in the case of, where it gives us 2 stories, it shows us how important they are by giving us 2, and it also refuses to allow us to take literally one or the other as the truth. Because if we take one, we have to reject the other. An example of this is like the order of creation. In the first story, Elohim creates human beings all at once on the 7th or on the 6th day, right after creating the animals. In the second account of creation, Yahweh creates one person, an Adam, on the first day, and then tries to find a mate for the Adam by making all of the animals, and then fails in that and puts the Adam to sleep and separates the Adam and now has male and female. So that's at the whole end of the process instead of at the beginning. There are contradictions that simply can't be reconciled in these accounts. But there they are standing side by side. That's how we should be. Mm-hmm. This is the first principle. We should be like that. We should not flinch when someone with a different perspective comes along beside us. We should say, oh, here's somebody who's standing right there who sees reality from a few feet, difference. I should be grateful to get the perspective that they have. Of course, it doesn't line up with mine, but that's because it's different.
Well, you said at an earlier point before we started our interview that these 2 stories contain a naming ritual that is very significant about the way human beings are supposed to relate to nature. Do I remember that right? Would you say more about that?
Yes. So this is related to what I'm talking about. This layout, when we consider the juxtaposition of 2 stories about where we come from ultimately that disagree with each other, what we find is the Bible telling us the ideal way for humans to exist together, side by side with disagreement. And the fruit of those, that existence side by side with disagreement is a profusion of creativity. The story of 7 days is told in conjunction with the story of Adam and Eve with great results, and wonderful illustrations and paintings and so on that incorporate details from both. So the Bible shows us, both in its presentation of the stories and in its legacy, that it's good to have difference, and when difference talks to each other, fruitful things result. Now, there's another way that the Bible presents speech in creation, and this is the thing that you and I were talking about earlier. The Bible presents the creation as utterly comprehensible. This is a delightful claim or implication about the nature of reality for people in the 21st century who are radically empiricists. who want to take matters into their own hands regarding their comprehension of what's really going on. So the Bible gives us the impression that that creation itself, every element of it, from the light to the darkness, the water, the land, all of the animals, everything within it, the celestial bodies, speaks. It's a result of speech, divine speech. It resonates, the words of God. It's meaningful, meaning it's comprehensible. All we have to do is open our eyes, open our senses, allow our mind to relax, and we know what things are. So this utter comprehensibility of nature is what we get through the first creation account. And the fact that the first creation account presents the creation as the result of God's speech gives us the impression that the creation is always talking, always disclosing, always, letting us know what's going on.
In other words,
that's a wonderful thing for students, because they're there to learn stuff, to know. And here I'm saying creation is always, always speaking.
In other words, the gift that God has given us by placing us in what we call creation is an open-ended, never-ending story in which we are not just listeners, but we're participants. However, that's a lesson that our country could well, absorb and adopt today. I mean, we are infamously locked into a binary situation over the last, I don't know what it's been, 20, 25 years, and it's really intensified lately. So this picture that you present of, the person standing next to us has something valuable to say, and that we should learn from it is there aren't many examples of that, at least at the political level. There are some.
No, but you know what is kind of nice? So while people are crazy in politics, which is nothing new, people are kind of Bible crazy in politics. So they're interested in the Bible. They're willing to pick it up and, hold it up. In some cases, they're willing to hold it up and burn it. I see within a couple of weeks, we had these dramatic images of the Bible, burned in a protest in Portland, brandished by Trump in front of a church in DC. And in both cases, I noticed that the Bible doesn't speak out saying, don't do this to me. This is not what I'm meant for. The Bible, like any text, allows what interpreters say about it to be said. And I think that that's what, for me, really makes it important to be responsible in what we say about the Bible, because we do give it meaning when we, make the claims that we make about its contents.
Well, it's sorely needed today. Let me ask you a few quick questions. I want to rewind now behind your contemporary, your current interests in scholarship and research.
Could I, Rick? Could I finish the thought?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I wanted to summarize the J, just to speak just a little bit about the J account.
You're talking about the two different creation accounts.
Yeah.
And J is the Yahwistic one? Right.
So the P account, the first account in which God speaks, let there be light, let there be a dome, and so on, is the account to which I was speaking earlier, where the creation is the words of God that's continually speaking. And I really love that because, as I said, it presents the world as comprehensible in its given form before we even arrive. But then I love the J account, because the J account, which is the account that begins in chapter 2, Adam and Eve and the serpent and all of that, that account has another role for speech in creation. And it's not God speaking, it's the human being speaking. The Adam that Yahweh makes, names all the animals, gives them order, actually approves whether to mate, whether each animal is a suitable mate or not, and ultimately determines the form that the mate that Yahweh will make for him will have, by his refusals. My point here is that the Adam in the second creation account engages in the act of creation by speech, by naming. And so we have in the first creation account a portrait of speech from God resonating throughout the creation. In the second creation account, we have an account of speech from human beings resonating back. It's a conversation in which the creation speaks and we respond, and it speaks. And I think that if we can appreciate that those perspectives are there in the text, and if we can try them on for ourselves in the classroom, then we can really get an appreciation for the harmony that exists in the text between these accounts that are radically, contradictory in some regards. We can also get, by trying on these perspectives from these ancient sources, we can try on, a relationship to the created world that we don't usually have. A relationship in which our speech to that world is received and meaningful to that world, and in which that world speaks to us comprehensively, and we comprehend. That's a wonderful experience to have. And I think the Bible can facilitate it. And I think that kind of experience can strengthen commitments to activism.
Well, this is a terrific thing for students to be exposed to and to experience. Do you find that they're responsive and that they evolve, shall we say, and in like fashion?
I have a garden. I see myself as a gardener, and that means I'm pretty patient with things. I'm watching the morning glories erupt every morning outside of my door. And I'm noticing, that each one is taking care of itself and opening in its own time. I'm really confident that if we speak to each other sincerely in the classroom and have exchanges about the things that are happening, the students are going to develop in the ways that they should. I can't predict when and I can't predict how, but it's really important that I give them resources to develop and that I give them space and time to do it in the way that they need to do it.
Well, we're going to run out of time in a minute, but I don't want to close before hearing a little bit more about your upbringing and background, specifically with respect to these twin passions of yours, Holy Scripture on the one hand and nature and the environment on the other. Was there a sequence in which these took possession of you, or did this all occur together, or when did they come together to make you the environmental biblical scholar that you are, Yonder? There's probably not a short answer to that, but maybe some chronology would help.
Well, I think of it as kind of like the givens of the universe that I've just come to accept. We're all born into this world in a certain location, and I happen to be born into Humboldt County, Northern California, which is just like hippie central. My parents were spiritual seekers. They still are. I mean, they're really wonderful, really, really deep and really loving spiritual people. They're, as you said, ordained Pentecostal preachers. And they were also, mountain folk when I was born. So I was born in the mountains, steeped in the mountains, gestated in the mountains, for about a year before Jesus came into the picture, before the Bible really, became part of our family. And so I guess those two things have always gone together for as long as I'm aware of like having a consciousness of this life.
Well, you've traveled from one coast in the bosom of nature to the other coast, to the advanced, shall we call it, cultural civilization of Boston. That's quite a journey that I trust you meant it when you said you were a gardener and that you still are. Is that how you still get your hands in the soil?
Yes, in boxes outside our house here. I really love it. In New England, it's the closest to Northern California that I've ever lived since leaving, with the combination of the mountains and the rivers and the coast. So I'm grateful.
That's wonderful. Would you have a word either about your own perceptions or where you would direct us when it comes to our civic engagement or political engagement around the issue of climate change today? Of course, we're 80 days or less from the national election, and that will be a fork in the road. But what have you seen as the lever that you find to be most productive and important to address?
I'm not sure if you're asking me if there's a particular candidate or party that I.
No, I'm a particular a particular project or approach to the environmental crisis. Is it through developing alternate energy?
Oh, I see.
That's what I meant.
Right. So it's a great question. There's one group that has done a lot of work on faith and environmental, faith and science and dialogue, and I cannot remember the name of the organizer at this point, but it's a forum. There's a major forum in which scientists like the director of the Goddard Center, James Hansen. So James Hansen,
Mm-hmm.
Other climate scientists like Peter Wadhams. I believe that he had the whole Arctic Crisis Working Group on as a guest, and I'm so sorry that I don't have that organization easily to hand, but there's this one group that has just done such a wonderful job of bringing scientists and theologians together. There's another group Jack Miles told me about that he was involved in. I think it was related. I will have to actually ask him about that. Jack told me that he'd been recruited to talk to write some things, some resources for on the environment and theology. So I could find out, and perhaps we could post those to where this podcast goes.
Oh, that would be very helpful. That's great. Jack Miles is you mean the author of God, a biography? And
yes, God's biographer.
God's biography, right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we've only barely turned over a single stone here. There's so much under this one that I'm hoping we can, just reschedule another one and maybe have a series, and we could involve some other people and conduct our own forum, which we couldn't do on the premises, but we could do it on screen here, which is now becoming rather, the coin of the realm. So we'll pick it up again. Okay, Yonder?
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Rick.
No, thank you for your time and for being here. Blessings upon you and your family, and to all of those who have been listening and watching. Bye for now.